You see, this December, you have to be careful where you buy your chicken. That was the first thing Isa's neighbor, Mama Nkechi, said as she barged into their small compound one sunny afternoon, hands on her wide hips and sweat dripping down her round face. She wasn't smiling, and Mama Nkechi always smiled, even when she didn't mean it. Is, who had been washing his school sandals by the small tap, looked up immediately, his curiosity piqued. "Why, Mama Nkechi?" Mama Nkechi shook her head and hissed. "Something is not right, I tell you. There's one new woman selling chickens. Her chickens are cheap, but they don't behave like other chickens. They don't even make noise." Is frowned and straightened up. "The chickens don't make noise?" "Yes," Mama Nkechi replied, bending down slightly so she was almost whispering. "Not one single sound. No clucking, no flapping. Nothing. It's like they are dead but still standing." Is couldn't stop staring at her. Chickens that didn't make noise? What did that even mean? Chickens were noisy animals. Even the small, skinny ones from the market would flap their wings and squawk like their lives depended on it. "Where is the place?" Is asked, unable to stop himself. Mama Nkechi waved her hand toward the edge of town. "It's that new poultry farm. Madame Felicia's farm. You know her, BA? The woman who just returned to Ngpor from the city. They say her chickens are the biggest and cheapest. Everyone is rushing to buy them. Then what's the problem?" Mama Nkechi sighed heavily and looked over her shoulder, like someone might hear her. "All I'm saying is, things that are too cheap are never good. You can tell your mama, oh, because I know she likes saving money. But me, I don't trust that woman." Is watched as Mama Nkechi hurried out of the compound, muttering to herself about chickens and curses. Now, if there was one thing Is knew about Mama Nkechi, it was that she loved to gossip and exaggerate. Sometimes, she even made up things just to keep the conversation flowing. So, chickens that didn't make noise? That sounded like one of her stories. But still, Is couldn't stop thinking about it. Later that evening, Isa's mother, Ijeoma, returned home from the market, carrying a heavy basket of vegetables and tomatoes on her head. Her scarf was tied tight, and her blouse was damp with sweat from the long walk back. Is ran to help her. "Mama, you should have waited for me to come with you." Ijeoma smiled tiredly as she lowered the basket. "I didn't want to disturb you, Is. You were washing your sandals, no?" Is ignored the comment and followed his mother into the kitchen. As she began to unpack the vegetables, Is decided to tell her what Mama Nkechi had said earlier. "Mama, you've heard about that new farm selling cheap chickens, right?" Ijeoma paused for a second, then nodded. "Yes, Madame Felicia's farm. They say her chickens are very fine, and the price is good too." "Why are you asking?" Is hesitated. "Mama Nkechi said something strange today. She said the chickens don't make noise. Not one sound." Ijeoma stopped unpacking. "Which kind talk is that?" "She said it's like the chickens are not normal," Is added quietly. Ijeoma straightened up, her tired face breaking into a small laugh. "Is, you and Mama Nkechi are the same. Both of you like listening to gossip too much. Chickens that don't make noise? How is that possible?" "But Mama, what if it's true?" "True what?" Ijeoma waved him off with her hand. "People in this town like to talk nonsense when they see someone making progress. Madame Felicia just opened her farm, and now they are saying her chickens are cursed. I beg, leave that matter. Tomorrow we are going there to buy our own chicken for Christmas." Isa's heart sank. "But Mama..." "Enough, Is," Ijeoma snapped, her tone final. "Do you think I have money to waste on expensive chickens? I've been saving for months to buy this Christmas chicken, and I won't let one rumor stop me. You'll follow me tomorrow, and you'll see for yourself that there's nothing wrong with those chickens." Is wanted to argue more, but one look at his mother's face told him it was pointless. Ijeoma had already made up her mind, and when his mother made up her mind, nothing could change it. Still, a small knot of worry tightened in Isa's chest. The next morning, Is and Ijeoma set off early for Madame Felicia's poultry farm. The road to the farm was a narrow, dusty path that led out of the town and toward the thick line of trees in the distance. "Is, hurry up," Ijeoma called, walking ahead of him with quick steps. If we don't go early, all the fine chickens will finish. Ease dragged his feet behind her, his sandals kicking up small clouds of dust. The closer they got to the farm, the quieter everything seemed to become. Even the normal sounds of the town, children playing, hawkers shouting, started to fade away. When they reached the entrance of the farm, Ease stopped and stared. The poultry farm was much bigger than he had imagined. Rows of large wooden cages stretched as far as his eyes could see, with chickens inside them. At first glance, everything looked normal, but something about the place felt wrong. It was too quiet. Ease glanced at his mother, who was already walking toward Madame Felicia, who stood under a small canopy with a table and weighing scale in front of her. "Good morning, Madame Felicia," Igioma greeted cheerfully. Madame Felicia looked up and smiled warmly. She was a tall woman with dark skin and bright eyes that seemed to look through people. She wore a long, flowing wrapper and a head tie, both made of colorful fabric. Her smile was friendly, but to Ease it looked a little too perfect. "Good morning, my sister," Madame Felicia replied smoothly. "You've come to buy chicken for Christmas. ABI? You have come to the right place." "Yes, oh," Igioma said with a laugh. "I heard your chickens are very fine and very cheap." Madame Felicia nodded proudly and gestured to the rows of cages. "See for yourself. These chickens are healthy, fat, and perfect for Christmas. And you won't find a better price anywhere else in Kpor." Igioma clapped her hands together, clearly pleased. "Ease, go and look for a big one. Be fast." Ease hesitated. He didn't want to go near those chickens. From where he stood, he could see them in their cages, standing still, their feathers clean and shining. But none of them moved. None of them clucked. None of them even flapped their wings. It's like they're statues, Ease thought. "Ease." Igioma's voice broke into his thoughts. Reluctantly, Ease walked toward the cages. As he moved closer, his skin prickled, and his stomach felt uneasy. He peered into the first cage and froze. The chickens were staring at him. All of them. It wasn't like the normal, curious way chickens look at humans. These chickens were staring with wide, unblinking eyes. Eyes that looked too human. Ease stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. "Mama," he called. "What is it?" Igioma asked impatiently. Ease pointed at the chickens, his hands shaking. "Mama, look at their eyes. Something is wrong with them." Madame Felicia's smile tightened just slightly as she turned to Ease. "Ah, my boy, there's nothing wrong with my chickens. They are just calm because they are well-fed and well-cared for. Isn't that what you want?" Ease opened his mouth to argue, but Igioma gave him a sharp look. "Ease, stop embarrassing me," she scolded. "There's nothing wrong with these chickens. Go and pick one quickly." Ease turned back to the cages, his heart pounding. This time, he avoided looking at their eyes. He chose the biggest chicken he could see and pointed. "That one." Madame Felicia signaled to a young boy who worked at the farm, and he pulled the chicken out of the cage. It didn't struggle. It didn't even flap its wings. It just sat quietly in the boy's hands, its eyes still open and staring. Ease's skin crawled. Back at the table, Igioma paid Madame Felicia, who smiled widely as she handed over the chicken, now tied up and silent. "Thank you for your business, my sister," Madame Felicia said smoothly. "Come back anytime. My chickens are always here for you." Igioma nodded and carried the chicken over her shoulder. "You see, Ease? Nothing is wrong with this chicken. Don't listen to gossip." Ease didn't answer. He couldn't stop staring at Madame Felicia, who was still smiling at them. Her eyes seemed darker now, as if she knew something they didn't. As they walked back toward the road, Ease glanced over his shoulder one last time. The chickens in the cages were still staring at him, and for the first time in his life, Ease felt afraid of a chicken. That night, Igioma began preparing the chicken for Christmas stew. Ease sat on the edge of his bed, his thoughts spinning. Mama Nkechi was right. He whispered to himself. Something is wrong with those chickens. Outside, the night was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that made you feel like you weren't alone. Ease shivered and pulled his blanket tighter around him. In his head, he could still see those chickens, silent, staring and unmoving. And somewhere deep in his heart, he knew this wasn't over. Ease woke up to the sound of his mother's voice calling him from the kitchen. The smell of boiling water and onions wafted into his room, making his stomach turn. He sat up slowly, the events from the day before rushing back into his mind. The chickens, the farm, their eyes. He shook his head as if trying to clear it, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Something wasn't right, and the more he thought about it, the worse it felt. Ease. Igioma's voice rang again, sharper this time. "I'm coming, Mama," Ease shouted back, pulling himself out of bed. In the kitchen, Igioma was already at work. She had tied her wrapper tightly around her waist, and sweat shone on her forehead as she chopped vegetables on the wooden table. The chicken, plucked and cleaned, sat on a tray beside her. Ease froze the moment he saw it. Even without its feathers, the chicken still looked wrong. Its skin was pale, almost too smooth, and its eyes, those same eyes that had stared at him from the farm, still haunted him. "Mama, are you sure this chicken is okay?" Ease asked, his voice uneasy. Igioma didn't look up. "Ease, I beg. What is it again? Why do you keep talking about this chicken?" Ease swallowed hard. It doesn't look normal. Look at its eyes." Igioma stopped chopping and turned to glare at him. "Eyes? Which eyes are you talking about again? The chicken is dead." "Ease, dead chickens don't have eyes that work. Stop saying things that don't make sense." Ease pointed at the chicken cautiously. "But Mama, don't you feel like it's watching you?" Igioma let out a loud hiss and smacked her hand on the table. "Ease, I don't have time for your foolishness this morning. If you don't want to eat the chicken, fine. But don't spoil my appetite. This is the Christmas chicken I've been saving for, and it's going to taste sweet." Ease wanted to argue, but he knew better. His mother wouldn't listen, not when she had already decided she was right. He looked at the chicken one last time and left the kitchen, the uneasiness still sitting heavily in his chest. Later that day, Ease's best friend Obina showed up at their house. Obina was tall and lanky, with a mischievous grin that never seemed to leave his face. He walked into the compound with a bounce in his step, holding a half-empty bottle of Coke. "Ease," Obina called loudly. "Come outside before I drink this Coke alone." Ease came out of the house, his face sour. Obina noticed immediately. "What is it?" Obina asked, frowning. "Why do you look like someone stole your last meat pie?" Ease sat on the low bench by the wall and shook his head. "It's that chicken my mother bought yesterday." Obina raised an eyebrow. "The chicken? What happened to it? Did it escape?" "No," Ease said slowly. I don't know how to explain it. The chickens at that new farm are not normal." Obina laughed and sat beside him. "Ease, you've started again. What do you mean the chickens are not normal? Did they start speaking Igbo?" "I'm serious, Obina," Ease snapped, turning to face him. "When I saw them yesterday, they were just standing there. Not moving, not clucking. They just stared at me. And this morning, the chicken my mama bought," he paused, shuddering. "It still felt like it was watching me." Obina stopped laughing and stared at him. "Watching you? You mean, even after it was dead?" "Yes." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Obina's playful grin had disappeared, and he looked at Ease carefully. "Are you sure you're not imagining things?" Obina finally asked. "Sometimes when you're afraid of something, your mind starts playing tricks on you." Ease shook his head. "No, Obina. I know what I saw, and I know how I felt. Even when we were at the farm, it was like the chickens were not alive. They were there, but it didn't feel real." Obina leaned back on the bench, sipping from his Coke bottle. "So what do you want to do now? Tell your mother to throw the chicken away? You know she won't listen to you." Ease sighed. "I know, but I need to know what's going on. I can't stop thinking about it." Obina scratched his head. "Well, I don't know about you, but I think you're making this bigger than it is. Chickens are just chickens. Maybe Madame Felicia feeds them something that makes them quiet. Or maybe they're just tired." "Tired?" Ease repeated, staring at him. "Since when do chickens get tired?" Obina shrugged. "I don't know, but it's better than thinking they're cursed." Ease didn't answer. He looked out at the road, his mind still spinning. That evening, Isa's mother prepared the chicken stew. The smell of onions, tomatoes, and spices filled the air. But instead of making Isa hungry, it made him feel sick. He sat in the corner of the room, watching his mother stir the pot with a wooden spoon. "Isa, come and taste the stew," Ijeoma said, holding out the spoon to him. Isa shook his head. "I'm not hungry, Mama." Ijeoma frowned. "Not hungry? Since when do you say no to stew? This chicken tastes sweet. I'm telling you." Isa stared at the bubbling pot. The steam rising from it seemed darker somehow, as though it carried something unseen. He couldn't explain it, but he felt it deep in his bones. "Isa," Ijeoma said firmly, "stop behaving like something is chasing you. Come and taste this food." Reluctantly, Isa stood up and walked to his mother. He took a small taste of the stew from the spoon, but the moment it touched his tongue, he felt strange. Tasted normal, delicious even, but there was something else, something he couldn't describe. It was like a heaviness settled in his chest, and his stomach turned. "See," Ijeoma said proudly. "Didn't I tell you? There's nothing wrong with this chicken." Isa wiped his mouth and sat back down. He didn't argue, but inside, the uneasiness only grew stronger. That night, Isa couldn't sleep. He lay on his thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. The room was dark, but he could hear the faint sounds of the town outside. Crickets chirping, distant laughter, the occasional bark of a dog. Then, suddenly, he heard something else. A faint scratching sound. Isa sat up quickly, his heart pounding. He looked around the room, but everything was still. The scratching came again, soft, slow, like something was moving just outside his window. Isa stood up quietly and tiptoed to the window. He held his breath as he looked outside. At first, he saw nothing but darkness. But then, in the faint light of the moon, he saw something move. It was the chicken, the same chicken his mother had cooked earlier. Isa stumbled back, his mouth going dry. The chicken stood just outside the window, its head tilted to one side, its empty eyes staring straight at him. "But how?" Isa whispered to himself. The chicken didn't move. It just stood there, silent and still, like it was waiting for something. Isa ran to his mother's room, his bare feet slapping against the cold floor. He pushed the door open and shook her awake. "Mama! Mama! Wake up!" Ijeoma groaned and sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Isa, what is it? Why are you shouting?" "Mama, the chicken. It's outside." Ijeoma frowned. "Which chicken?" "The one you cooked," Isa said desperately. "It's outside the window." Ijeoma stared at him for a long moment, then hissed loudly. "Isa, have you gone mad? How can a cooked chicken be outside? Are you dreaming?" "I'm not dreaming," Isa shouted. "Come and see for yourself." Ijeoma sighed heavily and climbed out of bed. "If I don't see anything, Isa, I'll flog you this night." They walked to Isa's room and he pointed at the window. "Look, it's there." Ijeoma peered out of the window, then turned to him with an annoyed expression. "There's nothing there, Isa." "Nothing." Isa pushed past her and looked out again, but the chicken was gone. The ground outside was empty, the shadows still. "But it was there," Isa whispered, his voice shaking. "I saw it." Ijeoma grabbed his ear and twisted it lightly. "Stop disturbing my sleep with your nonsense. Go back to bed, and don't wake me up again. If you dream about chickens, keep it to yourself." She stormed out of the room, leaving Isa alone. Isa looked back out the window one last time. The chicken was gone, but the feeling in his chest hadn't disappeared. Something was wrong. He knew it, and whatever it wasn't over. The next morning, Isa told Obinna what had happened. "You saw the chicken outside your window?" Obinna asked, his eyes wide. "Yes," Isa replied. "It was staring at me." "Obinna, I'm not making it up." Obinna scratched his head. "But how can a chicken that's already been cooked come back? That doesn't make sense." "I know it doesn't make sense," Isa snapped. "But I saw it. I know what I saw." Obinna sighed. "Okay, fine. What do you want us to do about it?" Isa hesitated, then said, We have to go back to Madame Felicia's farm. I need to know what's going on. Obina stared at him like he had grown two heads. Go back there? Are you crazy? Do you want Madame Felicia to catch us and beat us with her broom? I don't care, Eze said firmly. Something is wrong with her chickens. And I need to find out what it is. Obina groaned loudly. Eze, you're going to get us into trouble. Please, Obina, Eze begged. You're the only one who will listen to me. After a long pause, Obina sighed and shook his head. Fine. But if anything happens, I'll tell my mama it was your idea. Eze nodded. Deal. As they walked toward Madame Felicia's farm, the same uneasy feeling crept back into Eze's chest. This time, he knew he wouldn't leave until he had answers. But deep down, a small voice whispered to him that some answers were better left unknown. Obina dragged his feet as he and Eze walked down the narrow path leading to Madame Felicia's farm. The morning sun wasn't yet too hot, but the air felt heavy, as if it knew something bad was coming. Obina kicked a small stone, sighing loudly. Eze, I still don't know why we're doing this, Obina grumbled. What if Madame Felicia catches us? You know how adults can be. She'll beat us with her slippers and still tell our parents. Eze ignored him, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. We need to find out what's wrong with those chickens, Obina. You didn't see what I saw last night. That chicken. It was outside my window. It was staring at me. And when I told Mama, she didn't believe me. Obina shook his head. But you said it disappeared. Maybe you were dreaming. I wasn't dreaming. Eze snapped, stopping suddenly to face Obina. I'm telling you, something is wrong. I can feel it in my chest. You don't believe me either, do you? Obina looked at his friend's serious face and sighed again. Okay, I believe you, but we'll look quickly and leave. I don't want any trouble. Agreed, Eze muttered, turning back to the road. When they arrived at Madame Felicia's farm, it looked just as it had the day before. Rows of wooden cages, silent chickens standing perfectly still, and the strange quietness that made Eze's skin crawl. The farm felt lifeless, like it wasn't part of the real world. Eze, Obina whispered, grabbing his arm. Do you feel that? Eze nodded. It's too quiet. Even farms have noise, but here, he trailed off, looking at the chickens. The boys crept closer to the first row of cages. Eze peered inside and felt his heart pound harder. The chickens were still standing in the same stiff, unnatural way, their eyes wide open and staring. Obina, Eze said in a low voice. Look at their eyes. Obina hesitated, then leaned forward to see. After a moment he took a step back, his face pale. Eze, they're not blinking. I told you, Eze whispered fiercely. Chickens are supposed to move. They're supposed to cluck and flap their wings. These ones, they're not normal. Obina swallowed hard. Let's go, Eze. This place is making my head spin. Not yet, Eze said, his voice firm. I need to see more. They moved down the rows of cages slowly, careful not to make any noise. The deeper they went into the farm, the more the air seemed to press down on them. The chickens never moved. Their eyes never blinked. It was as if they were waiting for something. Obina tugged at Eze's sleeve. Eze, I'm begging you, let's leave. What else do you want to see? Eze didn't answer. Instead, he stopped near the farmhouse. It was an old, wooden building with peeling paint, and there was something unsettling about it. Like a secret it was hiding. That's where we need to go, Eze said, pointing at the farmhouse. What? No way, Obina protested. You've seen enough. Let's go before someone sees us. Obina, listen, Eze whispered urgently. The chickens are not normal and this farm is strange. Don't you want to know why? What if Madame Felicia is doing something bad here? Obina stared at the farmhouse, shaking his head. Eze, you're gonna get us killed. This isn't a movie. This is real life. Then go back if you're scared, Eze said, determination burning in his voice. But I have to see for myself. Obina groaned and grabbed his head. Ah, fine. Let's go. But if anything happens, I will tell everyone it was your fault. Eze gave him a quick nod, and together they crept toward the farmhouse. The wooden door creaked loudly as Ease pushed it open, and both boys froze. They held their breath, waiting for someone or something to hear them. When no one came, Ease stepped inside, with Obinna close behind. The farmhouse smelled musty and old. Dust floated in the sunlight coming through the broken windows. The room they entered was small and empty, except for a table with some papers scattered on it. "Check that table," Ease whispered. "Why me?" Obinna hissed back. "Because you're closer." Grumbling under his breath, Obinna tiptoed to the table and picked up one of the papers. He squinted at the words. "Ease, this looks like some kind of list." "What list?" Ease asked, moving closer. Obinna turned the paper around, his face puzzled. "Names. And numbers next to them. Look. There's a name here. Mama Ngozi, 2, and another one. Mr. Okafor, 3. What does it mean?" Ease asked. "I don't know," Obinna replied, frowning. "But it looks like people are buying more than one chicken." Ease grabbed another paper and stared at it. His eyes widened. "Obinna, look at this." The paper had a drawing on it. A strange symbol that looked like a circle with lines running through it. In the center of the circle, there was something that looked like an eye. "What kind of drawing is that?" Obinna whispered, stepping back. "Ease, I don't like this place. I don't like it at all." Ease stared at the symbol, his heart racing. "I think Madame Felicia is doing something bad here. Something to do with those chickens." A sudden sound made both boys freeze. Footsteps. "Ease," Obinna whispered sharply. "Someone's coming." Ease grabbed the papers and stuffed them into his pocket. "Quick, hide." They dove behind a wooden cabinet just as the door creaked open. Through a small crack, Ease saw Madame Felicia walk into the room, her colorful wrapper swishing with every step. She was muttering to herself, words Ease couldn't understand. Madame Felicia moved to the table and picked up one of the papers. Her expression was hard, her face suddenly looking older and sharper. Ease held his breath, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure she could hear it. Obinna sat beside him, squeezing his arm tightly. After what felt like forever, Madame Felicia sighed and turned toward the door. "Soon," she muttered under her breath. Very soon, the door creaked again as she left the farmhouse, and the boys waited for a full minute before moving. "Ease," Obinna whispered, his voice shaking. "Did you hear that?" Ease nodded, his face pale. "We need to go. Now." The boys ran all the way back to the town without stopping. By the time they reached Ease's compound, they were both panting and covered in sweat. "Ease, what did we just see?" Obinna asked, leaning against the wall to catch his breath. "What was Madame Felicia talking about?" "I don't know," Ease replied, still trying to process everything. "But I think it has something to do with that symbol. And those chickens. We need to show someone these papers." "Who?" Obinna asked. "Your mother? She didn't believe you before." Ease shook his head. "No, my mother won't listen. But maybe someone else will." The next day, strange news spread through Ngpor. Mama Ngozi's entire family had fallen sick overnight. People said they were fine the day before, but after eating chicken from Madame Felicia's farm, they all developed fevers and chills. Ease heard the news from Mama Nkechi, who was shouting about it to anyone who would listen. "Didn't I tell you people?" Mama Nkechi cried, waving her hands in the air. "I said something is wrong with that woman's chickens, but nobody listened. Now look, Mama Ngozi's children are all sick." Ease's stomach turned. He turned to Obinna, who had come to their compound as soon as he heard. "Obinna, it's happening," Ease said quietly. "Those chickens are making people sick." Obinna looked around nervously. "But what do we do now? Shouldn't we tell someone about what we saw?" "Yes," Ease said firmly. "We need to tell Pastor Chikwudi. He's the only person who will listen to us." That afternoon, Ease and Obinna walked to the church to find Pastor Chikwudi. The pastor was an older man with kind eyes and a calm voice. He was sweeping the church compound when he noticed the boys approaching. "Ease, Obinna," Pastor Chikwudi said with a smile. "What brings you here?" "Pastor, we need to talk to you," Ease said urgently. "It's about Madame Felicia's chickens." Pastor Chiquity stopped sweeping and looked at them curiously. Her chickens? What about them? They're not normal, Ease said, holding out the papers he had taken from the farmhouse. We went to her farm and we found these. Look at the symbol, Pastor. And people are getting sick after eating her chickens. Pastor Chiquity took the papers and studied them carefully. When he saw the strange symbol, his expression changed. His brow furrowed, and he looked back at the boys. Where did you find these? He asked quietly. In her farmhouse, Ease replied. We saw her there. She was talking to herself, saying something about soon. Pastor, something bad is happening. We need to stop it. Pastor Chiquity looked at the papers again, his face serious. Finally, he nodded. Thank you for telling me this, he said. Go home for now, and don't tell anyone else about what you saw. I will look into this. But, Pastor, go, Pastor Chiquity said firmly. I promise I will handle it. That night, Ease lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. He wanted to believe Pastor Chiquity would fix everything. But deep down, he knew the worst was yet to come. Outside, the town was quiet again. Too quiet. And Ease couldn't shake the feeling that something dark, was waiting for all of them. Ease woke up to the sound of loud voices outside their compound. At first, he thought he was dreaming. But when he heard his mother's sharp voice among the noise, he jumped out of bed and rushed to the window. A small crowd had gathered near their gate. His mother, Igioma, stood in the middle, her hands on her hips, shouting at someone. Ease's heart started to pound. What is going on? He whispered to himself. He grabbed his slippers and hurried outside. The early morning sun was already casting light on the commotion, and more neighbors were gathering to see what the noise was about. When Ease pushed through the crowd, his eyes widened in shock. Madame Gozi, their next-door neighbor, stood there looking weak, holding her headscarf tightly around her hair. Her eyes were red and swollen, as if she had been crying for hours. You are still defending that woman? Madame Gozi shouted, her voice cracking. Igioma, I am telling you, that chicken you bought from Madame Felicia is not ordinary. It is evil. My whole family is sick because of her chickens. Igioma scoffed loudly, waving her hand dismissively. Gozi, what are you saying? Chickens are chickens. Stop talking like a madwoman. Do you think Madame Felicia put a curse on you? Don't let fear scatter your head. Igioma! Madame Gozi's voice trembled as she pointed an accusing finger. You have a son, don't you? If anything happens to him, you will understand. My children are lying in bed, shivering like they are about to die. They only ate chicken from Madame Felicia's farm. Since then, none of us has been well. A murmur swept through the crowd. People glanced at each other uneasily, whispering under their breath. Some nodded in agreement, while others shook their heads, clearly torn. Ease stepped forward, his voice louder than he meant. Mama, listen to her. Madame Gozi is right. I told you there's something wrong with those chickens. All eyes turned to him. Igioma spun around, glaring at Ease like he had said something unforgivable. Ease, will you keep quiet? What do you know about chickens? Go back inside before I flog you here. Ease felt anger rising in his chest. Mama, I'm not lying. You saw it too. That chicken was not normal. It didn't move, it didn't flap, and I saw its eyes. That's enough, Ease. Igioma shouted, her voice sharp. Stop saying foolish things. Madame Gozi turned to the crowd, desperation on her face. You see, people don't want to listen. But let me tell you now, if you eat those chickens, you will regret it. My own family is proof. If you don't believe me, go and see my children with your own eyes. And go back to your house and pray for them, Igioma snapped. This December, everyone is looking for who to blame for their problems. Leave Madame Felicia alone. The crowd began to shift, some people leaving, others shaking their heads as they murmured. Madame Gozi looked broken as she turned and walked away slowly, her shoulders slumped. Ease clenched his fists, feeling helpless. He wanted to shout, to make everyone listen, but nobody seemed to care. Later that day, Ease sat with Obina under the mango tree in front of his house. Obinna tossed small stones at the ground, his face thoughtful. Ease, it's getting worse, Obinna said quietly. My uncle told me that 2 more families are sick. They all bought chickens from Madame Felicia. Ease looked at him sharply. Then why is no one doing anything about it? Obinna shrugged. People don't want to believe it. They're saying it's just food poisoning or bad luck. It's not bad luck, Ease snapped. We know what we saw at that farm. Those chickens are not normal. Madame Felicia is doing something bad. I'm sure of it, Obinna sighed, shaking his head. Ease, we're just kids. Nobody will listen to us. Even Pastor Chiquiti said he would handle it. But nothing has happened yet. Ease frowned, thinking back to the day they gave Pastor Chiquiti the papers from the farmhouse. The pastor had looked serious, but Ease hadn't heard from him since. What if we talk to him again? Ease asked suddenly. Pastor Chiquiti? Obinna frowned. What will that do? We can ask him what he found. Maybe he's just waiting for the right time to stop Madame Felicia, Ease said. We need to know if he's taking it seriously. Obinna hesitated, then nodded. Okay, let's go. But I hope we don't waste our time. The church compound was quiet when Ease and Obinna arrived. Pastor Chiquiti sat on a wooden bench under the shade of a tree, reading his Bible. He looked up when he saw the boys walking toward him. Ease, Obinna, Pastor Chiquiti said with a warm smile. What brings you here again? Ease didn't waste time. Pastor, did you look at the papers we gave you? Did you find out anything about Madame Felicia's chickens? The pastor's smile faded, and he closed his Bible slowly. Sit down, he said, gesturing to the bench beside him. Ease and Obinna sat down, their eyes fixed on the pastor. He sighed deeply, rubbing his hands together. Boys, Pastor Chiquiti began, his voice serious, I have looked at those papers and I must admit, they are strange. Ease's heart leapt. So you believe us? You believe there's something wrong with Madame Felicia's farm? The pastor paused, looking carefully at Ease and Obinna. What you boys did was dangerous. You should not have gone to her farm without permission. But, Pastor, listen, Pastor Chiquiti said firmly. I don't want you to go back there again. Madame Felicia is a respected woman in this town, and we cannot accuse her without proof. Do you understand me? Ease stared at him in disbelief. But Pastor, we have proof. We saw the chickens. We saw the papers with the strange symbol. The pastor shook his head slowly. It is not enough. People will say we are spreading rumors. If Madame Felicia is doing something bad, it will be revealed in God's time. Ease jumped to his feet, his face red with frustration. God's time? People are already getting sick, Pastor. What if something worse happens? You have to do something now. Ease, calm down, the pastor said softly. You are just a boy. Leave this matter to the adults. Ease felt like screaming. Obinna tugged at his arm, whispering, Let's go, Ease. He won't listen to us. Ease turned to Pastor Chiquiti one last time. Pastor, if something bad happens, don't say we didn't warn you. The pastor looked at him sadly. Go home, Ease. Stay away from trouble. The walk back to Ease's house was silent. Obinna kept glancing at him, but Ease didn't say a word. His mind was racing, his heart heavy. Nobody wanted to listen. Not his mother, not Pastor Chiquiti, nobody. Ease, what do we do now? Obinna finally asked. Ease stopped walking and turned to his friend. We go back to the farm tonight. Obinna's eyes widened. Tonight? Are you mad? I'm not mad, Ease said firmly. If nobody wants to listen, then we need to find proof that they can't ignore. Obinna shook his head, looking terrified. Ease, no. Madame Felicia might catch us this time. Or worse, what if something happens to us? Ease grabbed his friend's arm, his voice low and serious. Obinna, people are getting sick. What if someone dies? We can't just sit here and do nothing. We have to stop her. Obinna stared at him for a long moment, then sighed loudly. Fine. But if we get caught, I'll never forgive you. That night, the boys met near the edge of the town, both carrying small lanterns and sticks. The road to Madame Felicia's farm felt darker than usual, and every sound made Obinna jump. I still don't know why I agreed to this, Obina whispered. If we see anything strange, we're running back. Okay? Okay, muttered, his eyes fixed ahead. But we need to be brave. Just a little more. When they reached the farm, the quietness hit them like a wall. The rows of cages were still there, and the chickens were still standing, silent and staring. The light from their lanterns cast strange shadows on the ground, making the whole place feel even creepier. Pointed at the farmhouse. We'll check inside again. Maybe we missed something last time. Obina groaned. This is how people die in horror movies. Obina, stop talking and follow me. They crept toward the farmhouse, every step making the wooden boards creak under their feet. Pushed the door open, and the boys slipped inside. The room was exactly as they had left it, except now, the air felt colder. Moved to the table and picked up one of the strange papers. Look, Obina. Still here. Obina's voice shook. I think we should leave. Before could reply, they heard it. A soft, distant sound. Scratching. Froze, his heart pounding. Did you hear that? Yes, Obina whispered, his voice trembling. Let's go. The scratching grew louder. It was coming from beneath the floorboards. I'm begging you. Obina grabbed his arm. Let's go before. Suddenly, the door slammed shut. Both boys spun around, their lanterns flickering. The scratching stopped. For a moment, the room was silent, except for the sound of their breathing. Who's there? Called out, his voice shaking. No answer. Then, from the shadows, a figure stepped forward. It was Madame Felicia. Her face looked different in the dim light, harder, colder. She smiled, but it wasn't the friendly smile they had seen before. It was a smile that made Isa's blood run cold. Well, Madame Felicia said softly, her voice like a hiss. What are you two boys doing here? Couldn't move. Obina was gripping his arm so tightly it hurt. We were just, stammered. Spying? Madame Felicia finished for him, her smile widening. Do you think you know what's happening here? Do you think you understand? She took a step closer, and the lantern light made her shadow stretch across the floor. You shouldn't be here, she said quietly, her voice dripping with something dangerous. This is not for you. Felt his legs shaking, but he forced himself to speak. What are you doing with those chickens? Why are people getting sick? Madame Felicia tilted her head slightly, as if she found his question amusing. Some things are not meant to be known, boy. You should have stayed away. The air in the room felt heavy, like it was pressing down on their chests. Glanced at Obina, who looked like he was about to cry. Then Madame Felicia whispered, Run along now, before it's too late. The boys didn't need to be told twice. They turned and bolted out of the farmhouse, the door banging behind them as they ran. They didn't stop running until they were far away from the farm. When they finally reached the road, both of them collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. Obina said between breaths, his face pale. What did we just see? Didn't answer. He couldn't, because deep down he knew they had just crossed a line. One they couldn't go back from. And whatever Madame Felicia was hiding, it wasn't over yet. Couldn't sleep that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Madame Felicia's words echoing in his head. You shouldn't be here. Some things are not meant to be known. Her cold smile haunted him. The way she had stepped out of the shadows in the farmhouse, like she had been waiting for them, made his skin crawl. It was as though she knew they would come. Obina had run straight home after they escaped, promising never to go near Madame Felicia's farm again. But couldn't stop thinking about what they had seen and heard. The scratching under the floorboards, the symbols on the papers, the chickens that didn't behave like normal chickens. Something dark was happening at that farm. He could feel it. The next morning, Isa's mother was in a bad mood. She banged pots in the kitchen and muttered under her breath as she prepared breakfast. Watched her cautiously, wondering if she had heard about the other families falling sick. Finally, Igioma spoke without looking at him. Did you and that Obina go to Madame Felicia's farm yesterday? Froze. Mama, what are you talking about? Igioma spun around, her eyes narrowing. Don't pretend like you don't know what I'm saying. Someone saw you and that boy running like mad people near her farm. Did I not warn you to stay away from trouble? Ease hesitated, unsure of how to answer. If he told his mother the truth, she would dismiss it as nonsense again. But if he lied, she would find out eventually. We just wanted to see something, Mama, Ease mumbled. Ijeoma dropped her wooden spoon on the table with a loud clatter. Chinik me. Ease, you will not kill me before my time. What were you looking for? Do you think I have time to run around paying people to forgive your foolish behavior? Mama, listen to me, Ease said desperately. You don't understand. Madame Felicia's chickens are not normal. People are getting sick because of them. Ijeoma threw her hands in the air. Ease, enough of this nonsense. Chickens are not witches, and Madame Felicia is not a devil. If you don't stop this talk, I will beat you so hard, you'll forget what a chicken looks like. But Mama, shut your mouth, she shouted, pointing a finger at him. If I hear one more word about Madame Felicia, you will see what I'm made of. Do you hear me? Ease clenched his fists and stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind him. Ease found Obinna sitting outside his house later that afternoon, kicking at a small stone with his bare foot. He looked up when he saw Ease and frowned. Your mama shouted at you too? Obinna asked. Yes, Ease said, sitting down beside him. She doesn't believe anything I say. She thinks I'm talking nonsense. Same with mine, Obinna replied, shaking his head. I told her we saw Madame Felicia, and she just told me to mind my business. It's like nobody wants to believe us. Ease stared at the ground, his mind racing. Obinna, we need to go back. Obinna's head snapped up. Go back? To where? To Madame Felicia's farm, Ease said firmly. Obinna's eyes widened in disbelief. Are you mad? Ease, did you forget what happened last night? She saw us. She knows we were there. I know, Ease said, his voice calm but serious. But we didn't find out everything. There's something under that farmhouse, Obinna. You heard the scratching. What if there's something hidden down there? What if that's the reason people are getting sick? Obinna shook his head violently. No way. I'm not going back there. Madame Felicia is not a normal person, Ease. She's doing something bad, I agree. But it's not our problem. Let the adults handle it. The adults aren't doing anything. Ease snapped. Pastor Chikwudi won't listen. My mother won't listen. Nobody believes us, Obinna. If we don't stop her, who will? Obinna looked at his friend for a long moment. Finally, he sighed and buried his face in his hands. Why do you always drag me into these things? Because you're my friend, Ease said with a small smile. Obinna groaned loudly. Fine. But this time, if we hear or see anything strange, we're running. No waiting around. Deal, Ease replied quickly. That night, the boys met near the edge of town again. The moon was half hidden behind clouds, and the darkness felt heavier than usual. Ease carried a small lantern, while Obinna clutched a thick stick tightly in his hand. Ease, I'm already regretting this, Obinna whispered as they walked down the narrow path to the farm. If something grabs me tonight, I'm haunting you for the rest of your life. Ease chuckled nervously. Nothing will happen, Obinna. We'll go in, find out what's under the farmhouse, and leave. The farm looked even scarier at night. The wooden cages stood like rows of dark shadows, and the chickens were still standing perfectly still, their eyes catching the faint light from the lantern. Ease shivered. They're still not moving. Obinna's voice shook. Let's hurry. I don't want to look at them for too long. They crept toward the farmhouse, every step making the wooden boards creak louder than before. When they reached the door, Ease paused and looked at Obinna. Are you ready? No, Obinna muttered, but let's just do this. Ease pushed the door open, and they slipped inside. The farmhouse was colder than before. The lantern's light flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. The air was thick and still, like it hadn't moved in years. Ease, this place feels worse than last time, Obinna whispered, his voice shaking. Come on, Ease said quietly. We need to check the floor. They moved to the center of the room, where the scratching sound had come from the night before. Ease knelt down and ran his hand across the wooden floorboards. "Help me lift this," Ease said, pointing to a loose board. Obinna hesitated, then set his stick down and knelt beside Ease. Together, they pulled at the floorboard until it came loose with a loud crack. Beneath the floor was a narrow, dark space that looked like it led underground. The smell that came out was horrible, like something rotten and old. "Ease, what is that?" Obinna whispered, covering his nose. "I don't know," Ease said, staring into the darkness. "But we have to find out." Before Obinna could protest, Ease grabbed the lantern and lowered himself into the hole. The ground beneath was damp and cold, and the air smelled even worse. "Ease, wait for me," Obinna hissed, quickly following after him. They crouched in the narrow space, the lantern light barely cutting through the darkness. The space seemed to stretch into a tunnel, its walls made of packed earth. Strange symbols were scratched into the dirt, symbols that looked like the ones they had found on the papers. "Ease, let's go back," Obinna whispered, his voice trembling. "This place is evil." "Just a little further," Ease said, holding the lantern higher. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, they began to hear something, a faint, rhythmic sound. It wasn't scratching this time. It was like chanting. Ease's heart raced. "Do you hear that?" "Yes," Obinna whispered. "I don't like it." "Ease, I think we've seen enough." But Ease didn't stop. They followed the sound until they reached the end of the tunnel, where a small underground room opened up. What they saw froze them in place. The room was lit by small candles placed in a circle on the floor. In the center of the circle sat a large wooden cage, and inside the cage were more chickens, but these chickens were different. Their feathers were darker, their eyes glowing faintly red in the candlelight. Standing near the cage, with her back to them, was Madame Felicia. She was chanting softly in a language neither boy understood, her hands moving slowly in the air as though performing a ritual. Obinna let out a small gasp, and Madame Felicia's chanting stopped. The room fell completely silent. Madame Felicia turned around slowly, her face calm but her eyes sharp. "Well, well," she said quietly, her voice echoing in the small space. "You two again." Ease couldn't move. He felt Obinna gripping his arm tightly, his hand trembling. Madame Felicia stepped closer to them, her shadow stretching across the room. "I warned you to stay away," she said softly, her eyes glowing faintly in the candlelight. Ease finally found his voice. What are you doing?" Madame Felicia smiled, but there was no kindness in it. "You wouldn't understand, boy. Some things are not meant for your eyes. You're making people sick," Ease shouted, his fear mixing with anger. "What are you doing to the chickens?" Madame Felicia's face hardened. "Go home, Ease. Go home and forget what you saw here." "No," Ease said, his voice shaking. "You can't keep doing this. People are suffering." Madame Felicia's eyes narrowed. "You are brave, boy, but bravery will not save you." Suddenly, the chickens in the cage began to move. They flapped their wings violently, their glowing red eyes fixed on Ease and Obinna. The candles flickered wildly, and the air grew colder. "Ease," Obinna screamed. "Let's go." Ease didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed Obinna's arm, and they ran as fast as they could back through the tunnel. Behind them, they could hear Madame Felicia's voice rising again, her chants growing louder and faster. When they reached the hole, Ease shoved Obinna up first, then scrambled out behind him. They slammed the floorboard back into place and ran out of the farmhouse, the cold night air hitting them like a wave. They didn't stop running until they were far away from the farm, their lungs burning and their hearts pounding. When they finally stopped, Obinna collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. Ease, what did we just see?" Ease bent over, his hands on his knees. "I don't know," he said breathlessly, "but we have to tell someone. We can't keep this to ourselves anymore." Obinna looked up at him, his face pale. "Who will believe us, Ease?" "Who?" Ease didn't answer. He didn't know. But one thing was certain. Whatever Madame Felicia was doing in that underground room, it was dangerous. And if someone didn't stop her soon, the whole town would pay the price. Ease and Obinna didn't sleep that night. They sat huddled in Ease's room, their faces pale, the events from the underground room replaying in their heads. The glowing chickens. Madame Felicia's chanting. The way the air had turned ice cold. "What are we going to do now?" Obina whispered, his voice shaking. "We have to tell everyone," Yves said, his voice firm but low. "We saw it, Obina. Madame Felicia is doing something evil with those chickens, and people are getting sick because of it. Who will believe us?" Obina shot back. "We're just kids. They'll say we're making it up." Yves took a deep breath. "Then we'll show them." By morning, the whole town was buzzing. It started when Yves and Obina ran straight to Mama Nkechi's house. "Mama Nkechi!" Yves shouted, banging on her door. The woman appeared, tying her headscarf as she stepped out. "Yves, why are you shouting this early? Have you gone mad?" "Mama Nkechi, listen to us," Yves said breathlessly. "Madame Felicia's farm. It's cursed. She's doing something bad underground. We saw it with our own eyes." Mama Nkechi frowned, her face softening. "What are you saying? Talk well." Yves grabbed her hand. "Please, come with us. If you don't believe us, we'll show you. If we're lying, then you can call us fools. But if we're not..." Mama Nkechi stared at him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I will come." Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Mama Nkechi, being who she was, couldn't keep it to herself. Soon, a group of villagers, men, women, even some children, gathered near the edge of town. "Where are you taking us?" one man grumbled. Yves stood in front of them, his voice clear. "To Madame Felicia's farm. We'll show you everything." The crowd followed as Yves and Obina led the way to the farm. The closer they got, the quieter everyone became. The air felt heavy, the silence of the farm pressing down on them like a weight. "Where are the chickens?" someone whispered, staring at the lifeless rows of cages. "Follow me," Yves said, his heart pounding. They pushed into the farmhouse, where everything was as they'd left it. Without wasting time, Yves and Obina pulled back the floorboard. Gasps filled the room as the villagers stared at the dark hole. "What is this?" Mama Nkechi whispered. "Come and see," Yves said. The crowd followed him into the tunnel. At the end, they reached the underground room. The candles were still there, but the cage of glowing chickens was gone. Where is it?" Obina stammered. "Look at the walls," someone cried. The symbols were everywhere, glowing faintly as if alive. Suddenly, the air turned cold, and a voice echoed through the room. "I warned you," the villagers screamed. Yves turned sharply. Madame Felicia stood in the doorway, her eyes glowing red. "You shouldn't have come here," she hissed. The candles went out, and everything turned black. The darkness swallowed everything. For a moment, it felt like the air had disappeared, and the room froze in a deadly silence. "Yves," Obina's voice rang out in the dark, shaking with fear. "Where are you?" "I'm here," Yves shouted back, clutching Obina's arm. He could hear people gasping, crying, and stumbling around in the blackness. Then, a sound broke through the chaos. Madame Felicia's voice. "I warned you," she hissed, her voice echoing everywhere at once, like it was coming from the walls. "You shouldn't have come here. You shouldn't have looked." The villagers screamed. Someone pushed into Yves, and he almost dropped the lantern in his hand. His heart was pounding so loudly he thought it would burst. "Light it! Light the lantern, Yves!" Obina screamed. With trembling hands, Yves fumbled for the lantern and struck a match. The flame flared to life, and the dim light cast flickering shadows across the room. The villagers huddled close, their eyes wide with terror. "Where is she?" Mama Nkechi whispered, looking around. Yves turned toward the doorway where Madame Felicia had stood, but she was gone. The symbols on the walls had stopped glowing, and the room now felt empty, but not safe. "She disappeared," someone muttered. "She was just there," another villager shouted. "How could she just vanish?" Yves's breathing slowed, but the cold feeling in his chest wouldn't go away. "She'll come back," he said quietly, his voice trembling. "She's not done." The villagers wasted no time scrambling out of the underground tunnel. When they reached the farm, the chickens in the cages were gone, every single one. The wooden farm was quiet again, but now it felt abandoned, like Madame Felicia had vanished, leaving only an empty shell behind. "What kind of evil is this?" a man muttered, wiping sweat off his face. Mama Nkechi turned to Ease and Obinna, her voice shaking. You were right. Something is not normal here." Ease nodded slowly. "We told you. What do we do now?" Obinna asked, his voice still trembling. The villagers murmured among themselves, looking at each other with fear and confusion. Nobody had answers. Suddenly, Pastor Chikwudi appeared, breathing heavily as he walked up to the group. "What is happening here?" he demanded. "Pastor!" Mama Nkechi cried, grabbing his arm. "It's Madame Felicia. She's doing something evil here." The boys were right. Pastor Chikwidi's face turned serious as he looked at the empty farm. "Where is she now?" "We don't know," Ease said, stepping forward. "She disappeared." Pastor Chikwudi turned to the crowd. "Go home. Pray for your families. This place will not harm us again." "Are you sure, Pastor?" someone asked nervously. Pastor Chikwidi's face was calm but stern. "Evil cannot hide forever. This farm will be destroyed. Madame Felicia will be found." That night, the townspeople gathered in their homes, locking doors and windows. Fear gripped Nkpor like a shadow. Rumors spread. Some said Madame Felicia had fled into the forest, while others swore they heard strange noises near the farm. Ease sat on his bed, staring out the window. The night was too quiet again. "What if she comes back?" he whispered to himself. A cold breeze blew through the room, and for just a second, he thought he saw a figure standing in the shadows outside. Madame Felicia's voice echoed in his head. "I warned you." Ease shivered and pulled his blanket tighter around him. Deep down, he knew this wasn't over. Not yet. The night after the confrontation at Madame Felicia's farm was the longest Ease had ever known. He sat on his bed with his knees pulled up to his chest, his eyes fixed on the window. Outside, the night was silent, too silent, as though the town itself was holding its breath. Obinna had gone straight home after they left the farm, refusing to even look back. "Ease, I'm done," he had whispered. "I don't want to see or hear anything about Madame Felicia again." Ease understood. Who wouldn't be scared? But the problem was that he couldn't forget the chilling way Madame Felicia had vanished, the scratching sounds under the floorboards, the symbols glowing on the walls. It was burned into his mind. The next morning, the entire village of Nkpor was awake and restless. Whispers spread like wildfire. Everyone knew about the farm now. People gathered in small groups, staring nervously at each other, afraid to speak too loudly, as though mentioning Madame Felicia's name might summon her back. Ease and Obinna sat under the old mango tree by the road. Neither of them said much. For once, even Obinna wasn't joking. "Do you think she's gone for good?" Obinna asked finally, breaking the silence. Ease shook his head. "No, she's still out there. I don't know where, but I can feel it. People like her don't just disappear forever." Obinna sighed, looking over his shoulder nervously. "What do you think she was doing? With the chickens and the chanting and the symbols?" Ease frowned. "It's like she was using them for something evil. Maybe the chickens were part of a ritual. That's why they didn't behave like normal chickens. That's why people got sick." Obinna shuddered. "You're scaring me again, Ease." Before Ease could reply, Mama Nkechi's loud voice broke through the morning air. "Everybody, come out. Come out and hear what Pastor Chikwudi has to say." The boys exchanged glances before hurrying toward the crowd that was already gathering at the market square. Pastor Chikwudi stood in the center of the square, holding his Bible. The sunlight glinted off his sweaty forehead, and his voice carried over the crowd like rolling thunder. "My people of Nkpor," he began, raising his hand to quiet the crowd. "We have seen things in this town that we cannot explain. Evil has tried to take root among us, but it will not win." The villagers murmured, their faces a mixture of fear and hope. "We have prayed, and we have spoken," Pastor Chikwudi continued. "Today, I say to you, Madame Felicia's farm will be destroyed. We will burn it down so no trace of her wickedness remains. There were gasps and whispers, but most people nodded in agreement. "Yes, Pastor. Burn it," someone shouted. "Let the fire cleanse the place," cried another. Isa's heart pounded as he watched the crowd grow more determined. He turned to Obinna. "They're really going to do it." Obinna nodded, his face pale. "I hope this works, Is. I don't want anything like this to happen again." By afternoon, the crowd had gathered at the edge of Madame Felicia's farm. Men carried sticks and matches, while the women stood to the side, whispering prayers under their breath. The farm looked exactly as it had the day before, silent, empty, and lifeless. But now it felt worse, like the ground itself was watching them. Is stood with Obinna near the back of the crowd, watching as Pastor Chikwudi stepped forward. The pastor raised his Bible high and began to pray loudly, his voice shaking with power. "Father, we stand here today to cleanse this place of evil. Let your fire drive out all darkness, all wickedness, and all harm from this farm." The men began to pour kerosene on the wooden farmhouse and the empty cages. The smell filled the air, sharp and bitter. "Is," Obinna whispered, gripping his arm. "Do you feel that?" Is turned and froze. The air had changed. It had grown colder, much colder. A strong wind blew through the farm, making the trees sway and the villagers shiver. "Pastor," one of the men called. "Something is happening." Pastor Chikwudi didn't stop praying. "Do not fear," he shouted. "Stand strong. Evil will not defeat us today." Suddenly, a sound echoed across the farm. It was soft at first, a low whisper like the wind speaking, but then it grew louder. It was chanting, the same chanting Is and Obinna had heard in the underground room. "It's her," Is whispered, his eyes wide. "She's here." The villagers looked around in panic. Some began to shout. Others dropped their sticks and ran. "Hold your ground," Pastor Chikwudi commanded, his voice booming. "Do not be afraid. Pray." But the chanting grew louder, swirling around them like a storm. And then, from the edge of the trees, she appeared. Madame Felicia. Her colorful wrapper billowed in the wind, and her eyes glowed faintly red. Her face was calm, but the way she stood there, like she owned the ground beneath her feet, made the villagers stumble back in fear. "You think you can stop me?" Madame Felicia's voice rang out, soft but clear. Pastor Chikwudi stepped forward, holding his Bible. "Your evil has no place here. Felicia, leave this town, or face the judgment of God." Madame Felicia laughed, a cold, empty sound that sent chills down Isa's spine. "You think your prayers can stop what has already begun?" Is grabbed Obinna's hand. "Obinna, we need to do something." "Do what?" Obinna cried, panicking. "Look at her. She's not even human." Pastor Chikwudi began to shout his prayers louder, and the men struck their matches. The flames caught quickly, spreading across the farmhouse and cages, the fire rising into the air. Madame Felicia's laughter stopped. Her eyes narrowed as the fire grew brighter, roaring like an angry beast. The villagers watched in awe as the flames consumed the farm, sending thick black smoke into the sky. "No!" Madame Felicia screamed, her voice twisting with anger. "You will regret this. All of you." The wind howled, and for a moment, it felt like the fire might die. But then it burned brighter, stronger, the flames crackling like they had a life of their own. Madame Felicia took a step back, her face twisting with rage. She pointed a long finger at the villagers. "This is not over," she hissed. "You will see me again." With that, the wind swept through the farm, and Madame Felicia vanished into the smoke. Hours later, the fire had burned itself out, leaving nothing but ash and blackened wood. The farm was gone. The villagers stood quietly, staring at the empty land. For the first time, the air felt lighter. The weight that had pressed on Kpor for weeks seemed to have lifted. Pastor Chikwudi turned to the crowd. "It is done. The farm is gone and the evil with it. Go home, and let us give thanks for God's mercy." The villagers murmured their agreement and began to disperse, relief on their faces. Is and Obinna stood at the edge of the ashes, staring at what remained. "Do you think it's really over?" Obina asked quietly. Yves didn't answer immediately. He looked out toward the trees, where Madame Felicia had disappeared. The wind rustled the leaves softly, but there was no chanting now, only silence. I don't know, Yves finally said. But we stopped her. For now. Obina nodded, shivering slightly. Let's go home, Yves. Yves turned away from the ashes, his heart still heavy. Deep down, he knew this wasn't the end. Madame Felicia had promised she would return. And promises like that were not made to be broken. As they walked back toward the village, Yves glanced back one last time. For just a second, he thought he saw something. A shadow moving at the edge of the trees. He blinked, and it was gone. But he couldn't shake the feeling that Madame Felicia was still watching. Waiting. And that one day she would return. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like and subscribe. Here is another interesting story to watch. Click to watch now.